Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. My name is Rob Scooter. Thanks for joining me today. So today we're going to look at the best Dynasty tight ends heading into the 2018 season. If you're in a Dynasty League or Keeper League, these are names you want to consider looking forward. Now, before we get into that video, the one thing we want to encourage you guys to take a look for, keep your eyes open for, is next week we're going to release our first mock draft video. It's going to be the one of many mock drafts that we're going to do in there. We'll talk about different trends in drafting that's happening, also some of our philosophies behind drafting, things you should consider when you head into your draft this fall. As we know, half the battle winning your league and being successful is having a good draft. Now, before we get into our actual rankings and numbers, there's a few things we want you to consider. So if you're in a dynasty league or if you're in a keeper league where you have to start tight ends, but they don't require you to keep a tight end, I won't even consider keeping a tight end in your league unless you have a tight end by the name Gronkowski, Kelsey, Ertz, or Ingram. Maybe they're on the bubble, you could consider Henry or Reed. Now, obviously, if you're in a league that requires you to keep a tight end going into next season, that's a whole different story. Now, some of the players we're going to talk about, they certainly could potentially go out and have a great year. They could have a breakout year. Some of these guys have really high ceilings. With that said, here's why I wouldn't keep some of the names. Like, I wouldn't keep a George Kittle. George Kittle's a guy that, look at his rookie year, we believe he's got some potential there. But he's a guy that could slip in the draft. And so what I would do is I wouldn't keep him. I would keep another player that's more proven, has more value that I can trust. I would put George Kittle back in the draft, and then I would pick him up later on the draft. And I certainly think you get more value out of that pick. Now, one of the things that we have talked about many times in our videos here is having a valuable pick or getting value in your pick. Well, what makes a valuable pick is not just his on-field production. There's other factors. One of the other factors is where you had to take him in the draft or how much you had to pay for him if you're in an auction league. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So let's say I draft Odell Beckham in the first round this year. He goes on, he has 78 catches, 1,078 yards, and ends up with 7 TDs. Well, if those are the numbers he has as a first-round pick, I'm going to see that as a pretty disappointing year. Obviously, those numbers are down below his career averages. That's kind of a disappointment for me. But let's say I draft Cameron Meredith, who's now playing for the Saints. I draft him in the 12th round, and he goes out and he has 78 catches, 1,078 yards, and 7 TDs. That's a great pick. I got a ton of value for that pick. So for some of the guys that we're saying that you shouldn't keep, if you're not keeping Gronkowski, Kelsey, Ertz, or Ingram, some of these other guys I wouldn't keep, their production simply isn't there to justify keeping them beyond the names that we had mentioned. I would keep another player and I'll let them go back in the draft. I'll give you an example for me. I'm actually in a Dynasty League. I've been in it for many years. Now we have some pretty big rosters and we have to keep 5 players going into next season. Okay. Now it doesn't have to be a tight end. It can be any combination of 5 that you choose. With that said, it's a full PPR league and I have Travis Kelce. So I'm going to keep him. But if I didn't have Kelce or the names that I mentioned, I wouldn't even bother keeping a tight end. I'd keep a wide receiver or running back, somebody like that that's got more upside. Also in this video, I think you need to consider is that this is not our tight end ranking video. That's really important to say that. This is not our tight end ranking video. This is our dynasty tight end or keeper video. So our rankings are based solely on how high of a ceiling that many of them have, not just simply their value for the 2018 season, but really looking beyond into 2019, 2020, 2021. And the other thing we want to throw out there is obviously a lot of this is going to change after the NFL draft takes place or as the start of the season gets closer. Now, one of the things that I've done in the video here, you'll probably catch pretty quickly, is I tended to go young. Now, here's the reason why I went young. It's a dynasty league, as we said. And so if you don't get a tight end in the top 5 or 6 in terms of rankings, tight end production after that falls off, and there's a lot of similarities between about the tight end ranking from about like 8, 15 even. Their numbers they put up are pretty similar, so I'd rather take a shot at a younger guy with a high ceiling and has more potential. For example, I'd rather grab a David Njoku than a Jason Witten. Jason Witten was a great tight end, but obviously his best years are behind him. He might have a couple good games this year, but overall, he doesn't have a lot of value there. David Njoku might be a little less inconsistent, but he's got a much, much higher ceiling, so I would take my chance with them. So those are some things to consider, but let's get into our rankings right now. The number 1 dynasty tight end for me out there, and for some of you are going to say, well, that's obvious, is Rob Gronkowski. Obviously, you see the jersey here. Some would say, well, that's an easy pick, right? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. Obviously, Rob Gronkowski has been a great tight end, but he's had trouble staying healthy through the years. As he gets older, that's going to continue to be a problem. And he hasn't said for sure that he's going to come out and play this year. He's talked about the possibility of retiring. And then the other thing that's been a concern is him and Bill Belichick are not in the same good terms as they once were. Okay, with all things considered, his issues with Belichick, the fact he hasn't said he's going to play, the injuries concerns out there. With that said, he is still the number 1 tight end, hands down, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, at age 29, he's not young anymore, but I'd rather have Gronkowski for 2 to 3 seasons than some other tight end for maybe 7 or 8 seasons. Make no mistake about this. Rob Gronkowski is the best offensive tight end in the history of in football. He is by far not even close. Now, if you take a look at when his career is all said and done, he might not have the career total stats, for example, like a tight end like Tony Gonzalez. And the reason why his career numbers will probably not quite be up there is because he plays very physical. It's what makes him a great tight end, but the same physical plays also why he has a lot of injuries, and those injuries are taking a toll on him. They decrease the total amount of games played, which of course are going to affect his career totals. With that said, if you take a look at his per game stats, his average stats per game when he plays, he crushes even the best tight ends in the history of the game. So I want you to consider some numbers for Rob Gronkowski. So if you look at Rob's per game stats and you project that over 16 games, here's what he averages in 16 games that he plays. 74 catches, 1,126 yards, and 12 TDs. That's what he averages over 16 games. Now let's take a look at some other Hall of Fame tight ends. Let's look at their per game average that are projected over 16 games and see what they average during their career. Let's look at Tony Gonzalez, obviously great tight end, right? Class act, love the guy. But Tony Gonzalez averaged 78 catches. That's pretty close to Gronkowski, but huge drop off in yards, only averaging 894 yards per season and 7 TDs. Shannon Sharpe, another great tight end. He averaged 64 catches every 16 games, 789 yards and 5 TDs. Then you have Antonio Gates. He averaged 67 catches per season, 837 yards, and 8 TDs. And then a guy like Kellen Winslow, another great tight end, a little bit farther back, averaged 79 catches per 16 games, 990 yards, and 7 TDs. These guys don't even come close to Rob Gronkowski's statistics. He averages over 16 games, 74 catches, 1,126 yards, and 12 TDs. This guy is the best offensive tight end in football. He's my number one guy. Yes, he's older. Yes, he has injury issues, but when he's on the field, this guy is unstoppable. He's the number one guy. The number two guy out there is Travis Kelce. Last 2 years, he's broke over 1,000 yards receiving. Last year, he saw a rise not only in he saw a rise in his red zone targets and TDs. Now, last year, he finished with 8 touchdowns, which is the most ever in his career. If we look at his targets last year, he had 117 targets. 31 came in the red zone. That means 26% of his targets were in the red zone. That left him 12th on the list when you consider all red zone targets between tight ends and wide receivers. So the guy gets a lot of looks in the red zone. He did see an increase in production his first 3 seasons. Every year he went up totals in his catches, yards, etc. Now last year he came up 2 catches short of his 2016 totals of 85. Last year he only had 83. But one thing to consider is last year he played 1 less game than he did the year before. So if he played 16 games last year, he would have beat that. So essentially what we're saying is he's increased his numbers every year that he's been in the league. Now for some of you, you might even rank him a bit ahead of Gronkowski. If you're a guy who's scared by Rob Gronkowski's health issues, he's a one guy that you might consider taking ahead of Rob Gronkowski. Once again, for me, I still think Rob's the number one guy, but Travis Kelce is more durable. Obviously, he stayed healthier, so you certainly have to consider that when you talk about taking a tight end. Now, one of the things that could happen this year, Travis Kelce, we'll have to wait and see. Mahomes is taking over at quarterback, and we're going to have to see. I expect that he's going to probably have a little bit of dip in targets, but maybe not. Now, Alex Smith was a quarterback before, and Alex Smith's tendency was he liked to throw high percentage passes to tight ends, running backs, things like that. We'll have to see how the second-year quarterback distributes the ball, but we expect another 5 or 6 very good productive years ahead of Travis Kelce. We expect him to stay above 1,000 yards many of those years, and we expect at least once or twice during that time to break double-digit touchdowns. This guy is a very, very good tight end. He's number 2 tight end. Number 3 tight end for us out there is Evan Ingram. Now, this was a quote last year before the season started. It said, "He's unbelievable." This is Giants tight end Mark Bavaro. He said, "I don't know what he's going to do or what he's going to look like in pads and playing football, but he can move, he can run, he can catch. He is impressive." So the coaches love this guy. I already talked about what an amazing athlete he was. His former first-round pick went out and he proved he has a skill, everything he needs to be an all-pro tight end for many years to come. He finished the year with 64 catches, 722 yards, and 6 TDs, playing on an offense that struggled many times last year. He's fast, he has athletic, he's got great hands, he's only 24 years old. Now here's the thing, if you look at Ingram, is that he's a little smaller than most tight ends. He's not a big tight end, he's only 6'3", doesn't weigh a lot. His skill set closer resembles a wide receiver. With that said, he's a smaller tight end. Once again, his skill set's closer to that of a wide receiver, but statistically, it actually gives him a higher ceiling as a tight end. How great is that to have a wide receiver that actually qualifies as a tight end in most leagues? So our number 3 guy is Evan Ingram. Number 4 guy out there is Zach Ertz. Now, the last 3 years, he's averaged 831 receiving yards per season with 79 catches. Those are really good numbers, especially when you consider the fact that he only played 14 games during that stretch. He had a career high of 8 touchdowns last season. And last year he had a 10-game stretch that during those 10 games he had 8 touchdowns. Now obviously his numbers were hurt. He was injured last year, and of course the injury to Carson Wentz all hurt his numbers. I predict this is the year that Zach Ertz gets double-digit touchdowns and gets over 1,000 receiving yards. It bodes very well that he has Carson Wentz on the ball for many years to come. Zach Ertz is number 4 guy out there. Number 5 guy out there is Hunter Henry. Now last year he saw an increase in catches, yards, even though he played less games. And he at times has shown the ability, he's shown like he has a skill to be an all-pro tight end. Now, there used to be a saying in football, I think people still say this at times, it takes a wide receiver 3 years before he really kind of comes into his own and really gets to see how talented he is. Well, I think that's going to be the case here for Hunter Henry. It's his 3rd year. We expect that he's really going to blossom this year. His numbers will take off. I think he's also going to be helped by the fact that Antonio Gates is going to retire, and he'll become the number 1 option in the red zone for Phillip Rivers. And if we know Phillip Rivers' past, if you look at Antonio Gates' statistics, Phillip Rivers is not afraid to target his tight ends. We saw how many years Antonio Gates had those great touchdown totals. We think a lot of those numbers could go to Hunter Henry now. Number 6 on our list is Jordan Reed. Now, if you look at his 2015 year, it reminds us just how talented this guy is and what he could do. In 2015, in 14 games, he had 952 yards, 87 catches, and 11 touchdowns in only 14 games. Now the problem with Jordan Reed is he has a hard time staying healthy. He's banged up a lot. He's injured. Also hurts that Vernon Davis is on that team, and Vernon Davis is a quality tight end backup. Hurts his value, but you can't ignore just how talented this guy is and how high of a ceiling Jordan Reed has. So what I would do is, if you're a guy out there, if you have Jordan Reed or if you draft him, cross your fingers, say your prayers that he stays healthy, and if he does, this guy could be a real steal of a pick later in the draft. Just so you know, I've been going through a lot of mock drafts. Jordan Reed has fallen very far down in almost every mock draft. So if you're a guy that wants to maybe wait, take him later on, load up on running backs and wide receivers, and if he stays healthy, gets back to what he did in 2015, you could have a great steal there. Number 7 is George Kittle. 24-year-old San Francisco tight end. He had a very good rookie campaign with 43 catches, 515 yards. The coaches were huge on this guy right away at the beginning of training camp. They loved him. We kept hearing time and time again. They thought this kid had all the talent to be very successful, and that led to them trading Vance McDonald to the Pittsburgh Steelers. George took over as the number 1 tight end there, and he looked good the rest of the year. He put up some decent numbers for a rookie, which is really impressive when you consider that most of the year he had a below-average quarterback throwing the ball. Obviously, later on, Jimmy Garoppolo gets traded, eventually takes over for the team. But for a good portion of that season, George Kittle had a very below-average quarterback there. It's going to be a huge upgrade, obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo being your quarterback. This is a guy that's got a lot of upside, a lot of potential. Coaches love this guy. George Kittle is somebody you need to keep your eye on. Number 8 guy out there is David Njoku. David has a lot of upside. He's very athletic, and he's got a lot of offensive upside. Now, last year he made a few acrobatical catches and really kind of confirmed his athleticism. Now, his numbers were hurt last year. They weren't impressive. He had 32 catches, only 386 yards and 4 TDs, but those numbers were more of a byproduct of bad quarterback play with Kaiser there. This former first-round pick is the youngest of all the tight ends we've mentioned. Currently, right now, he's 21 years old. He'll be 22 for the duration of the season. Of all the tight ends that we have talked about, he probably has the highest ceiling of all of the guys out there. With that said, he probably needs one more year to really kind of come into his own. So he's not a guy that I would keep, but he's certainly a guy that I would maybe pick up. You may want to pick up a backup tight end with him in case he needs another year to mature. Number 9 is O.J. Howard. Tight end for Tampa Bay, 23 years old. He's a very talented tight end with a lot of upside. His former first-round pick is big at 6'6". He's a 6'6". He's a big, physical tight end. His play reminds me an awful lot of Antonio Gates if you watch how he plays and how he uses his body. And he had some flashes last year. It showed that he's got the ability to be very successful in the NFL. In fact, the last 5 games, 3 of the last 5 games, he had over 50 yards receiving, and he had 3 TDs. Now, the one thing that hurts his value at this point is Cameron Brate on that team, because Cameron Brate's a very quality tight end in himself. And so he's a guy who would be a great bench stash coming up this year. Number 10 is Kyle Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph is what you see is what you get. Now, I'm a Vikings fan. I live in Minnesota, so I can see a lot of Kyle Rudolph. He's steady. He produces. He is what I'd say has a high floor but a low ceiling. He's a guy that you can expect. He's going to be out there. He's going to be productive, but he's not going to have a huge year. We don't expect this guy to get 1,000, 1,200 yards. It's just not going to happen. He's another guy that has lower value in standard leagues, and the reason why, he's never had big yardage totals. In fact, he's only averaged 450 yards a season during his career. His high yardage total year came in 2016 when he had 814 receiving yards. Now, I think it's important to remember that his big year there, we had 814 yards, was when Sam Bradford was a quarterback, and Sam Bradford, because of bad offensive line, had to dunk and dink the ball over the place here and there, so he had to use his tight end a lot, so that gave him a lot of production. Otherwise, he's averaged 46 catches per season. The last 3 years, though, he has averaged 7 TDs per season, so that's a positive with him. Once again, what you see is what you get with Kyle Rudolph. Not great, but will be steady, and he will produce for you. Number 11 is Jack Doyle. Percentage-wise, statistically, it's not an opinion. They looked at stats, they broke it down. Percentage-wise, Andrew Luck targets his tight ends more than any other quarterback in the NFL. Things appear to be looking up for Andrew Luck. All reports are that he'll be ready for the start of the season. Now, if you look at Doyle, he's averaged 70 catches the last 2 years after he took over for Kobe Fleener, who left via free agency. So after he's taken over, Doyle became the number one guy, and he's had a lot of catches. Do I have concerns for Doyle? Well, I do have a few concerns. One, Andrew Luck's health. At this point, they came out publicly and said there is a timetable, but they won't talk about their timetable. The whole Andrew Luck and the Colts camp has been very quiet, a little suspicious, especially after what happened last year, where they said he was fine, he was going to play, maybe miss a game or two, miss the whole season. So that's one concern I have. Another concern I have for Doyle is the fact that he had so many catches, yet it hasn't produced a lot of yardage per se. So some concerns there. With that said, with him and Luck, assuming Luck is healthy, they should be a nice combination for a few years. Number 12 is Austin Hooper of Atlanta, 23 years old. His targets were lower last year, but his production increased from his rookie year. He's still young at 23. I look at his numbers, I look at the offense, where he's at. I look what Tony Gonzalez did years ago. He's a guy that I could easily say this year getting 60 catches, maybe 750 to 800 yards, and 6 TDs are easily attainable for him. Also, at his age, he has a high ceiling. Number 13 guy is Tyler Eifert of Cincinnati. Tyler is a TD machine. He's a big body at 6'6", like we said earlier, much like Howard. He will always get a lot of targets in the red zone because of that. Now, he's a tight end that has much less value in PPR leagues or leagues that highly value yardage. If you look at the season of 2015 and 2016, he's averaged 0.86 TDs per game, which projected over 16 games turns out to be 14 touchdowns. This guy gets a lot of red zone targets. He's got a lot of value in that. Number 14 is Cameron Brate. This guy has shown he can produce in the NFL. Now, the problem with it is the Bucs drafted Howard last year, which sent his value plummeting downward, Cameron Brate. Now, why did I put him on the list? Obviously, he's a guy that's the number 2 guy in Tampa Bay. That hurts. But if for some reason he ends up on another roster, or if Howard gets hurt, something like that, this guy has proven he can produce in the NFL, and he's still relatively young at 27. You got to keep your eye on him. Now, number 15 is a guy that you're really just investing in potential, and that's Ricky Seals-Jones. Tight end for Arizona, age 23. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Ricky was a college wide receiver who was converted to tight end. So it took a while for him to learn the position, to get worked into that. Last year, he was kind of quiet early on, but as he made adjustments, the year got better and better. He looked pretty good down the stretch. Now, this is a guy that's got a very low floor, but a very high ceiling. Once again, a converted wide receiver. This guy has all the receiving skills to be a great offensive talent. He's what we would call a sleeper pick going into this year. So I want to talk about just a few guys here that aren't considered what I consider huge dynasty tight ends, but I want to talk about them briefly. These guys don't have a lot of dynasty value at this point, but they still have value in what we call redraft leagues. And these are guys that you would consider drafting about the kind of 6 to 9 tight end zone. You'll see in our tight end ranking video as the season gets closer, kind of where we put these guys at. But I want to talk about Jimmy Graham. Great tight end for many years, but age and surgeries have slowed him down quite a bit. Now he's in Green Bay. And listen carefully what I'm about to say to you. Don't get excited because he's in Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers is quarterback. Last year, everybody felt that way with Bennett. We caution you in the videos. In fact, if you look at our website, if you look at our numbers, for those that watched our videos, we told you that Bennett was going to have a great year. For whatever reason, tight ends don't thrive with Aaron Rodgers in that offense. Aaron Rodgers in that offense is designed to look the ball downfield, to stretch the field, things like that. So tight ends don't have a huge year there. With that said, Jimmy Graham is still very talented. He's got a few productive years ahead of him. Another guy out there is Greg Olsen. He's a guy who 3 consecutive years out 1,000 yards, but he's 33 years old now. He struggled to come back from a foot surgery and foot injury last year. He struggled to recover from that. Here's what we think with Greg Olsen. He's still going to get many targets, many receptions, but his days of breaking 1,000 yards are done. Another concern for him is he was never a big TD guy. In fact, he's only averaged 5 touchdowns per season his entire career. So Greg Olsen is a guy that will certainly have value in redraft leagues, but doesn't have a lot of upside in dynasty leagues. Another guy out there is Vernon Davis. Vernon Davis is 34 years old. He shares time with Reed. He's older. Reed is what we call fine stopgap or plug and play week to week, but he's not really a viable option as a starter unless Reed goes out for an extended period of time. And then the final guy I want to talk about there is Delanie Walker. Delanie Walker is a decent quality tight end for some of you out there, but he's 34 years old. Now, the last 4 years, he's averaged 896 yards and 74 catches per season. One, he's not young anymore, and he's never been a big TD guy. In fact, he's only averaged 3 TDs per season his entire career. He's a guy that definitely has value in redraft leagues, but doesn't have huge upside in dynasty or keeper leagues. So anyways, that's our dynasty tight end video. Next week, look for our mock draft. We'll also be releasing our quarterback dynasty video. Thanks for joining us at the FFP once again. Keep watching. Get your friends to subscribe. Take care and God bless. Bye.